This is J. Krishnamurti's second public talk in Santa Monica, California, 1971.
Shall we continue with what we were talking about yesterday? I think one thing that one must clearly understand, which is that we are the world. There must be great changes in the world. Morally, spiritually, if I can use that word, which has been so abused. In the world of relationship, sociologically, there must be a deep, radical change. And this change can only be brought about lastingly when each one of us changes within himself. Because we are the world, and the world is us. We have created this world. The world of ambition, greed, success, the division of religions, the social divisions, national divisions, and so on. We are responsible for it, each one of us. And however much we may want to see a change in the world outside us, we don't seem to realize that this change can only be brought about effectively, sanely, and lastingly when we ourselves as human beings change. I think that is an active truth, not a mere intellectual idea or a philosophical concept, but an actual reality, as one needs food, clothes, and shelter, that there can be and there must be a radical change in the environment, and that can only be brought about when each one of us feels utterly, totally responsible in his daily life. Most of the religions throughout the world have vaguely stated this in different terms, that you must lead a noble life, you must love your neighbor, and so on. But apparently, we have never been able to do that. We have never felt responsible, not only for our activity, for our daily behavior, but also to see that in the world around us there is a righteous conduct, a way of living that is not totally brutal, that is not violent. And apparently we disregard this responsibility. And most of us seek, caught in this turmoil, some form of entertainment. And that apparently is spreading more and more in the world, to that the desire to be entertained. All religious functions are a form of entertainment, like football. If you have observed your advertisements, the way of your life, entertainment plays an immense part. You don't want to be disturbed. You don't want to face the truth. You don't want to look at yourself. All that you're concerned with is to be entertained. And this meeting, like the next two, is not an entertainment at all. We are here to be really serious, to face things as they are, whether we like it or not, to look at them. And in the very process of observation, to find out what to do. And therefore, it behoves us to be deeply serious. And one of our major problems in the world is violence. Whether one can live in this world totally peacefully, without any violence, is a fundamental issue which each one of us must answer. Violence has apparently existed throughout the centuries upon centuries. Religions have tried to curb it, to hold it in check. They haven't succeeded, because there have been terrible religious wars. Socially, there have been restrictions. And all that is gone. Now we are brutally, openly violent, aggressive, indifferent, accepting violence, the killing, not only on the battlefield, but also in daily life, throwing bombs, hurting people. We have accepted it as a way of life. And yet at the same time, we want peace. There are all these signs of peace, diagrams of peace. And in one's heart, there is no peace at all. So this is a very radical issue and must be solved fundamentally. Because without peace, life becomes a torture, uncertain. You know what is happening in the big cities, not only in India, but in New York, in all these places, jungle. One must have peace to live beautifully, creatively, with joy, with a sense of deep appreciation of the beauty of the earth, because it is our earth. to live in it, happily, peacefully, enjoying everything. But that is not possible if there is any form of violence. And as human beings, as you and others, we are violent. Our whole structure of social behavior is based on violence. Our relationship is violent, well, between husband and wife, wanting to dominate, possess, or be dominated, is part of this violence. And volumes have been written about it. What are the causes of violence? Anthropologists, sociologists, scientists, religious people have written extensively. Explanation is one thing, and the freedom from violence is another. Explanations doesn't absolve us from violence. We think by explaining what are the causes of violence, we somehow have transcended and gone beyond violence. And one can see in one's own life, apart from what the specialists have written about violence, why we are violent. What is the root of all this violence in us? I don't know if you have ever asked that question. And if you have asked, to find out the truth of it. Not superficially, not castigating oneself that one mustn't be violent, but to be serious enough, quietly, hesitantly, find out why our life, the daily existence, has become so appallingly violent. One of the major causes of violence, and this is not an explanation by a specialist, if one observes oneself, it is that there is this comparative life. We're always comparing ourselves with something else. Aren't we? Aren't you comparing yourself with the ideal, with what you should be, or what you have had? This comparison, this measurement between what is and what should be. That is one of the major causes of violence. Comparison. Because where there is comparison, there is imitation. The denial of what actually is. When you compare A with B, as they do in schools and universities, you are destroying A, because you want A to conform or become like B, who is intelligent, who is superior, and all the rest of it. In that measurement is the whole issue of violence. when you compare yourself with your hero, with the ideal, with the image you have about yourself, of what you should be, the measurement, that is essentially violence. Because you are totally denying actually what is. And therefore, imitating, conforming. Conformity, imitation, is a form of violence. Please, as we said yesterday, don't merely listen to what is being said, but use the words as a mirror in which you are seeing yourself. You can see it in your life, how from childhood there is this comparative evaluation of life, which we call progress. That is, measuring oneself with another. And out of that comes the sense of either superiority or inferiority. And therefore, there is fear. Don't you notice this in your own life? You have the ideal of success in this country. And that terrible goddess is spreading all over the world. To be successful. And also you have the ideal of the better. Don't you? The better. When you are pursuing the better, you are denying the good. Are you following all this? Or am I talking to a wall? Because that's what we are doing. Improving ourselves, which is a terrible thing. Because you have a pattern. You have a concept what you should be. And the attempt, the struggle, the conflict to become what you should be is the very essence of conflict, is the very essence of violence. If one could really see the truth of that, not a verbal acceptance or denial of it, but to see the truth of it, that as long as we are always comparing ourselves, in which there must be imitation, conformity, the sense of superiority, inferiority, and fear. All that involves violence. Now, can one live a life in which there is no comparison at all? You're following all this? Because to us, the idea of progress has become extraordinarily important. Better bathrooms, better cars. One can understand technologically progress, technologically. Better modes of transportation and so on. But is there psychologically any progress at all? You understand? Becoming something other than what is. And when you attempt to conform to a pattern, whether created by society, by the culture in which you live, or rejecting the culture or the society, you have your own pattern of behavior and try to conform to that, that becomes violence. Haven't you noticed how the religious people, the so-called religious people, are the most extraordinarily violent people? Haven't you noticed it? They're intolerant, bigoted, narrow, always aggressive, wanting to make you conform to their pattern, join their particular little, shoddy little sect. Whether it is large or small, it's still shoddy. And that's what we call progress. Please, do listen, don't laugh. This is much too serious to laugh. One has to shed tears over all this, not laugh. Laughter has its place. To laugh is marvelous. To really laugh. But when you are talking about serious things like this, to casually laugh, which means you are not paying attention to look what is actually happening in the world. And we are asking, though there is technological progress, and there must be, industrial progress and so on, so on, so on. Is there psychological progress at all? Progress implying time. Moving from the known to the known. A movement from the past through the present to the future. And that's what we are trying to do. We're trying to improve ourselves. Without understanding the whole structure of ourselves. Without understanding this movement of what has been, what is, and what should be. And violence is the denial of what is. And to find out what is, actually what we are, This whole question of trying to become something must be totally set aside. Because one has to have the capacity, the energy, the vitality, the intelligence to observe what is. And you will not have that intelligence if you are always pursuing the what should be. Always measuring yourself with another. You know, I do not know if you ever tried to live a life without comparison. Have you? Never compare yourself with another about anything. Do you know what that means? Not to be satisfied with yourself as you are, which is fairly easy, which most people want, but to see how the mind, the whole structure and the nature of the mind is always measuring. More knowledge, more pleasure, becoming better. This whole movement is born out of this measurement, comparison, and imitation. And that, the speaker says, is the very essence of violence. Do you accept all this? Do you see all this? Do you see the truth of this? If you do, and I hope you do, then you will say, what have I left? Because I've always thought understanding came through comparison. Comparing two painters, say, like Michelangelo or who would you like? Michelangelo or Da Vinci or Picasso or somebody else. Compare. By comparing, you think you understand the painting. You understand it only when you look at it without the comparative eye. When you look, give your heart and your mind to see the picture totally. But if your mind is occupied with who painted it, or is this painter as fashionable as the other painter, and so on, you're not looking at the picture. So, to find out for yourself how your mind is operating, to be aware whether you are continuously comparing, not only in your dress, and that's the most extraordinary thing in the world, isn't it? One year it's short skirts, next year it's something else, and everybody, like a lot of sheep, follow it. And if you don't, you feel rather inferior. It's the same pattern, repeated intellectually, same pattern in your way, attitude and ways of life. This is a fact. short hair and long hair. You know, the continuous life of imitation. And that life of imitation is measurement, comparison, and therefore it's a life essentially of violence. So if you see the truth of it, not linguistically or logically, but see the actual fact of it, then what have you left? Right? You understand my question? If you're not measuring, comparing yourself psychologically or in any other way with another, then what have you? Then your mind is totally free of violence. You understand what that means? To have no sense of resistance. No sense of division. And we shall go into that presently. So, if there is no conformity, and it's extraordinarily interesting to find out in what ways we are conforming. When the speaker goes to India, as he does every year, he puts on Indian clothes. Is that conformity? And when he's here, he puts on trousers. And especially it's hot. May I take my coat off? Is that conformity? Or is conformity much deeper than that? It is to conform to a pattern set by somebody, by society, by a religious preacher, by the, all that, or conforming to your own particular pattern. When you deny totally all conformity, and therefore deny totally all authority, oh, you don't follow all this. Do you follow all this? Then what have you left? You understand my question? I hope you are doing this, because we are taking a journey together. If you don't follow it, if you don't journey together, share this problem together, what we are going to proceed with will have no meaning. Because if you don't imitate, if there is no sense of measurement at all, then a totally different kind of intelligence comes into being. And that's what we are going to inquire into presently. As we said, if you're not conforming, if you're not comparing, which is certainly the very essence of violence, and if you deny that, then what have you left? then what is the basis of your existence? You follow what I'm talking? Are we going together? You understand my question? We have been conforming. We have been imitating, pursuing this sense of superiority or struggling with the sense of inferiority, which arises through comparison. You understand? Look, I compare myself with you, and I see I'm not so clever, not so intelligent, not so sensitive, not so alive. And you're beautiful, you're nice looking, clear. And through comparison, I say I'm dull, I'm insensitive. You're following this? Through comparison, I only know I am dull. But if I don't compare, am I dull? You're following this? I only know through comparison I am dull. But if I put aside totally, and I mean totally, this sense of comparison, what am I then? I can only put aside totally comparison when I realize the absurdity, the illogic of comparison, the brutality of it, the violating nature of comparison. That brings about a totally different kind of intelligence. Not the intelligence of saying, I must be clever, which is too stupid. I don't know if you follow all this. Right? So in the same way, when there is no sense of comparison, and therefore imitation, conformity, all the rest of it, then what is there? Then what are you? You're following all this? Then what are you? Basically, if one observes, there are two principles in us actively: pleasure and fear. The pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of fear or danger. Right? Isn't that the only two main drives in us? Right? Shall we go on? Huh? May I go on? Which doesn't mean that you are accepting what I am saying or denying. We are sharing together this question. You understand? To live a life in which there is no comparison, and therefore no violence. And to understand the structure and the nature of violence is to understand this whole thing, which we have just explained. And in that observation, the perception of the truth of that is intelligence. And with that intelligence, I'm going to observe my life. You're following all this? Tompi. I must go on. I can't go on asking you each time whether you understand or not. Now I see in one's life these two active principles: the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of anything that brings about fear. Fear not only of physical danger, but fear caused by any disturbance in any form of relationship. So I have to find out what is pleasure and what is fear. Because those are the two things that are driving us. It is pleasure that is making me conform. It is pleasure that is making me violent. Because if I don't have my demand, the desire to fulfill in pleasure, it breeds violence, obviously. It makes me angry, resist, fight. Haven't you noticed all this? So one must inquire into this whole question of pleasure. Because if you have observed yourself, you'll have noticed how incessantly we are demanding it and pursuing it. Not only the pursuit of the future pleasure, but the remembrance of the past pleasures. And trying to shape our life, our existence, in the pattern of pleasure. Pleasure being entertainment, enjoyment, whether it be sexual or otherwise, intellectual pleasures, pleasures of knowledge. The pleasure of wanting to find out enlightenment. The other day, somebody sent an invitation for a gathering which is going to be enlightenment. They're going to teach you, or you're going to acquire enlightenment. This is one of the most gullible countries in the world. As though another can give you enlightenment. Anybody that comes from India or from Asia with a beard and with a peculiar dress, you fall. And why? Because you are seeking pleasure. That's all you want, basically. And until you understand this, really what is implied in pleasure, violence will go on. And a man of violence can never perceive anything intelligently. I mean, there are all the groups, so-called physical revolutionaries. They think they'll transform the world by killing people, not only in this country, but in Europe and in India, which of course ends up in either bureaucratic tyranny or dictatorship and all the absurdities of that. So one must seriously give one's attention to find out why is the mind, the brain, the whole structure of our existence is based on pleasure. And therefore one has to find out what is pleasure. What is pleasure, sirs? Which you are so eagerly pursuing, whether in old age or young, even at the last moment when you are dying, there is this enormous pressure of pleasure. Now what is it? Every experience is translated in terms of pleasure and pain. Experience, the word itself, means to go through and finish. And not carry it over. That's what the word itself, the root, means to go through. But we never go through. We never finish. We're always carrying over to the next day all our problems, all our griefs, all our miseries, and also all our pleasures. So, pleasure is the continuance of an experience that's never finished. Huh? Look, the speaker has talked so much about all this. To himself it becomes a boredom if he doesn't innovate all the time. Renew, see it totally differently each time. And one sees that experience leaves a mark as memory. Whether it is sexual memory or a memory of pain or memory of danger and so on. Every experience leaves a mark. And experience means the finishing of that particular incident, particular happening, and therefore never leaving a mark. You follow it? The imprint of the experience, whether it's painful or pleasure, is the continuation of pleasure and pain. Right? The imprint. Look. You had an experience yesterday. Sexual or other forms of sensory incidents and happenings. the happening of the light on the hills, on the yellow, clear hill in the sunlight, the beauty of it, the serenity of it, the stillness of it, the quality of the shadow, the extraordinary movement of silence. That experience has left a mark. Why has it left a mark? Because you want it repeated again tomorrow. Right? But if you look at it totally and observe it completely, non-verbally, you end it. And therefore you can look at the next sunset afresh without the remembrance of the past memories, of past sunsets. But we don't do that. What takes place, if you have observed, is that experience of that great beauty is translated into terms of pleasure. Right? You see that sunset and you say, how marvelous that is. How extraordinarily beautiful. The very verbalization is to fix it in memory. When you turn to your friend, say, do look how lovely that light is. You've already fixed it as memory, which is part of the brain. Then the reaction to that memory is the continuous demand to have that particular incident happening repeated. Right? So the demand by thought for the repetition of that particular experience is the continuance of pleasure. You get it? Look, sir, to put it more vulgarly and crudely, which is what most of you pursue probably, you have had a sexual experience and that has left a mark. And you think about it, chew it, like a cow. And you take delight in it. You have the images, pictures, and all that, and you want to repeat it, which is thought, which is the response of memory, picks up that incident of the sunset or the sex, and pursues it through image and through remembrance, wanting the repetition of it, which is pleasure. Isn't it? This you can observe very simply in yourself if you have the interest or the time or the energy or the vitality. You can observe it in yourself. How thought, which is the response of memory, memory being experience and knowledge, and that thought, which is silent at the moment of actual perception. When you see the sunset completely, thought is absent. But thought comes along presently and says, how marvelous, I must have it again. So thought nourishes through memory the sustenance and the continuance of pleasure. Right? That's fairly simple, isn't it? And that's what we are doing. That is, look what we are doing. That we are living in the past always. The past is the memory, is the experience, is the knowledge. So knowledge becomes a means of pleasure. Are you following? And so knowledge becomes a tremendous conditioning. And knowledge is always in the past. So, one observes in oneself the operation and the movement of thought as pleasure. We are not denying pleasure. I mean, to look at a sunset, and if you can look at it, it's the most marvelous thing. When you can see those hills with those new spring flowers, with fresh eyes that have not seen a thing before, is a marvelous thing. That is true joy. And joy is something entirely different from pleasure. And one sees how thought, which is the response of memory, experience and knowledge, sustains an incident which was a delight and gives it a continuance as pleasure, which must be sought after tomorrow. And so we are living always in the past. And to live now is to live in eternity, in timeless state. But we won't go into that. And also, when you observe pleasure and the disappointment in pleasure, the sense of not being able to fulfill in pleasure breeds anger. So pleasure brings with it violence. Because in pleasure there is always a sense of fear. Right? No? Look. What is fear? Aren't you all afraid? Not only of losing a job, fear of death, fear of not being enlightened, fear of so many things, fear of losing your identity as though you ever had your identity. And you can only have your identity with something you already know. And therefore what you are seeking when you are trying to identify yourself is with the known. And therefore what is known is already the old. And therefore your identity is with the past. Therefore when young people are trying to identify themselves, they're already dying, like the old. You seem to accept all this, don't you? It's strange, you are accepting all this. It's up to you. And fear. Because we must understand these two things so completely that you live in total peace, therefore without any kind of violence. In that there is great beauty. It's only the man that is completely at peace with himself and knows what is peace, that is truly creative. Not the man that lives in tension and produces a book. He is not creative. Or paints a picture and so on. So you must really understand these two basic issues of life, pleasure and fear. We've more or less gone into this question of pleasure. And so we're asking, what is fear? As you're sitting there, obviously, at this present moment, you're not afraid. So you can't recall it. You can't awaken it, which would be artificial. But you know what fear is. The fear of physical pain. You have had pain a week ago and you don't want to repeat it again. You may take all the drugs and all the pills which all the advertisements do say, but yet there is the fear of pain, physical pain. Then there is the fear in relationship of losing, of depending, and the fear of loneliness, fear of old age, fear of not being loved or wanting to love, fear which is a form of jealousy when your wife or husband looks at another. We are tortured by fear, consciously or unconsciously. Fear being danger, both physical and psychological. You ever had physical pain? A month ago, that pain has left a mark on the brain, the memory of it. And thought, which is the response of that memory, says, I don't want that pain again tomorrow. It was too awful. So thought, born out of the knowledge of previous pain, breeds the fear of a future pain. You understand? Thought of losing the person on whom you depend. And therefore, you legally, socially possess that person in marriage. That's what marriage is, isn't it? The family. And in that, in the desire to possess, in the desire to hold, to dominate, there is the fear of losing. There is a fear of uncertainty. So there is not only conscious fears, but also there are these secret, deep-rooted fears. One can deal fairly adequately with the superficial fears. Like darkness, afraid of what people say, it becomes too immature and too childish to deal with all that kind of stuff. But to go into the question of the deep-rooted fears, how can the conscious mind, the waking mind, investigate the hidden fears? And because we have them, you may suppress them, you may keep them in the cave, carefully locked up. But there they are. There are all the neurotic fears and the safety, the security in neuroticism, which will avoid fear. All that's involved in it. So I must be quick. So the question also arises from this: how can the conscious mind investigate the total and hidden mind with all its secret purposes, motives, fears, drives? And when you put that question to yourself, the whole horde of psychologists and analysts say, we will help you, which is through analysis. Right? I hope there are no analysts here. I see one or two, but I know them, so they will forgive me. Again, we have accepted something which has no basis at all. Analysis implies an analyzer and a thing analyzed. Analysis implies time, dependency. And the longer you take, the more profitable it is for the other. And you can go on analyzing yourself till the last moment, till you're dying. So I can't go into all this, there's no time. Obviously, analysis is not the way. So question arises, how is it possible to open up the whole content of consciousness? Because consciousness is its content. Is this getting a little bit too abstract? Tant pis. You understand what we're saying? The whole of consciousness, whether superficial or deep, is its content. And how is that content to be thrown open. And who is the observer that can see totally and not analyze? You're following this? Because in investigating and understanding fear, you have to ask this question. Through dreams, I don't know what time it is. What time is it? 4:15. Is it? May I go on? We think we understand through dreams and the interpretations of those dreams, the content of our consciousness. But when you observe dreams, observe it, not learn it from book, from the specialist. When you observe your own dreams, you will see that it's a continuation of your life, daily life, only in symbolic form. Right? What you are living during the day is the continuation in the form of dream. And the specialists say you must dream, otherwise you'll go mad. Quite right, you would go mad. But you have never asked, why should there be dreams at all? You understand? If dreams are the continuation, the expression in symbolic form when you are asleep, if there is a change in your daily movement, if you understand totally the movement of your life, then dreams are not necessary. You follow? And it's really quite interesting when you go into it. And I don't know if you have time to go into it now, this evening. Can a mind so completely be aware during the day, aware, attentive to every movement of thought, watching, and open to every intimation and hint of the content of the unconscious? If it is aware completely during the day, you will see that when you sleep, you have no dreams at all. When you have no dreams at all, then your mind is, when you wake up the next morning, is full of vital, clear, new energy. But if you merely continue with the same old pattern of daily existence, with your worries, with your appetites, with your, longings, frustrations, identifications, and all the nonsense that goes on, then your dreams are the repetition in symbols, right? So we are concerned with fear. Whether the mind can ever be free absolutely from fear. Can one be free from physical fears? Begin with that, you will see. The fear of past pain. Because the continuation of that pain, which is finished, The continuation of a pain which is over is the product of thought. Right? Which is the response of memory. Can that pain which you have had a week ago be completely forgotten? Otherwise there is fear. You're following this? Do please follow it. Because you will see something in your own life, there will be a vast change. That is, when there is physical pain, to give complete attention to it. Go to the doctor, whatever you do, but watch it completely so that it doesn't leave a mark. It's over. And the physical pain can be dealt with that way. I'm sure all of us had physical pain in different forms, acute or superficial. And one can deal with it so that the brain doesn't hold the memory of that pain. Psychologically, it's little more delicate and subtle. Fear of not, take your own fear and examine it. Fear, all right, I'll take it for you. Dependency. You depend on somebody, don't you? Not on the postman, milkman, and all the rest of it, but depending on your wife or husband, on your friend. Dependence implies that you are seeking in that person comfort, companionship, and all the rest of it. Pleasure, sexual, all that. And in that attachment, there is fear, which expresses itself in jealousy. And to observe the whole structure of dependency, see how you depend and understand it. Not say I must not depend or become indifferent, but to watch it. How the mind operates when you are confronted with this dependency. Then you are facing fear. Now, the moment you face fear, what takes place? Not only all the physical responses, but in more psychological, more subtle forms of it. What takes place? You either run away from it, or you name it as fear. Please do follow this. Name it as fear, and therefore fix it in the memory of the past. But if you don't name it, but merely observe it, without condemning or justifying it or finding the reason for that fear, just to observe it, then you will see that the memory of the past fear doesn't come up. And therefore you are free of the present fear. You do it and you'll find out. So, thought breeds, or thought continues or gives continuity to pleasure and to fear. Right? So, you have to understand the whole structure of thinking. Because without understanding what is thinking, you won't be able to understand what is pleasure. Right? Why pleasure has become such an extraordinary thing in our life. And that question, what is thought, upon which all our civilization is built. All our culture is based on that. And to us, the intellect has become, incredibly important. And being important, you deny in the intellect, kill the mind, So one has to go into this question of what is thought. Because on that, pleasure, fear, violence depend. Shall I go on with it, or do you want to stop? Can you take all this? Have you got energy to go into it? No, I'm afraid you haven't. You're merely hearing a lot of words while the speaker is working at it. You're not working at it. You're not taking it, chewing it, trying to find out for yourself how to live with a life in which there is no imitation, no conformity, no comparison. Therefore, no violence. And to find out what pleasure is. And to go into it, giving your energy, attention. And also to see whether the mind can ever be totally, and I mean totally free of fear. Because if you're not, then you live in darkness, consciously or unconsciously. And all your actions will be in darkness. You may have marvelous superficial culture, lovely organizations to give you everything you want, including wars. And fear will continue. So you have to, as a human being living in this monstrous world, have to understand not only violence, pleasure and fear, but also the question of what is thought. Can thought ever be free? Or is thought is always old? And you will see that thought is always old, because it is the response of memory, which is the past, which is knowledge. And yet knowledge we must have. Otherwise you can't go home. You don't know how to drive. And yet knowledge, as thought, becomes destructive when there is fear, which is the product of, which is the continuation of thought as fear. I don't know if you're following all this. So, if you don't mind, we'll have to go on with this tomorrow, next Saturday. Because this will take too long, because many things are implied in it. This is part of meditation, to find out What is the function of thought? Where thought is destructive, where thought is necessary. What is the function of the intellect? Which is reason, logic, to think very clearly, not woolly, abstractly. And where thought becomes the most corrupt thing, is love the product of thought? When love is associated with most people, with sex. So this question of what is thought must be gone into very, very deeply. Because if you do not know the ending of thought, you do not know what it is to meditate. It's only when the mind is completely quiet, that is when the brain itself is without any movement of thought, then only there is a possibility of that extraordinary enlightenment. Would you like to ask any questions? Or shall we stop now, because it's nearly 4:30? Sir, forgive me. A lot of people are making noise. You can't answer it now. Will you bring it up tomorrow, next Saturday?